You are sent by Caius as an agent of the Blades to gain intel. He requests that you join one of the local factions in the city of Balmora. So you decide, since you are naturally talented in magic, you will have a look at the local Mages Guild. You have heard good things about them after all. So, after walking through Balmora, you enter the local guild, running into a Dunmer who says to you,
"My time is precious, so make it quick."
Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Fiction. In today's video, we will be discussing the Mages Guild. More specifically, why did the Mages Guild in the Elder Scrolls series dissolve? To do this, we will need to go through the history of the Mages Guild. So what are their origins and what historic events have they been involved in? Then we need to go through what is this organization specifically, so what rules do they have, how is the Mages Guild structured, and how are they involved in politics? Finally, we will move into what are the different branches of the Mages Guild. In this, we will discuss what services the guild offers in their branches along with anything the Mages Guild may have banned. So let's begin with the origins of the Mages Guild. For this, we start in the Second Era, just before the formation of the guild. We are going to begin with the story of two students. This is Vanus Galerion and Manimarco. They were both students in the Sigic Order, and they became friends during their time mastering the mystical arts. However, with the many years passing by, Vanus would uncover something. He would find out that Manimarco was practicing necromancy. Now, necromancy was not exactly favored by the Order, and Vanus would beg for Manimarco to stop and ask for him to beg for forgiveness. Instead, Manimarco would recruit the other rogue members and flee the island. This would lead to the formation of the Order of the Black Worm, along with the Mages Guild in the year 230. The Mages Guild was founded by Vanus Galerion, who, as we know, was previously a member of the Sigic Order. Now, the Sigic Order as a whole at the time of the Mages Guild being established had begun to fall out of favor with society. Their policies of isolationism promoted a general sense of mistrust from the wider community in Tamriel. Along with this, the Sigic Order practiced what would be considered ancestor worship as part of its religion. This religion at the time was no longer considered popular with the people of Tamriel, which is why the Mages Guild would take on a more dominant position as the professional order for mages. However, this was not without meeting some resistance. So in the same year it was established, there would be a charter conclave. This is where Vanus Galerion would be brought in front of his former mentor, Lachesis, along with the Kinlord of Firsthold, this being Rillis XII, and several other nobles. This charter conclave would question Vanus on his true intentions with the Mages Guild, whether the organization truly meant to pull the resources of mages, sorcerers, and mystics alike to create a single order. This order having a purpose of research and public charity, as at the time of its establishment, the idea was revolutionary. No one had considered doing anything like this. With Vanus Galerion's speech, he managed to sway the members of the conclave into allowing the guild to be established, and allowed them to continue on with what they had been planning to do, to the point where even the Kinlord Rillis would join on as a co-founder of the Mages Guild. This would, of course, be for his own gain, and against what many of the common folk of his region wished for. Rillis would have his own motivations, like making pacts with Daedra, and saw the Mages Guild as a way to do so. The Mages Guild unknowing of his plan, but the common people at the time saw it as him making deals with dangerous mages, as his deceitful behavior would come to light much later. But anyway, moving on to the year 321, still in the Second Era. This is where the Guild Act would come in. This would essentially legalize various guilds under the Second Empire. They were given protection and encouragement in return for paying levies to the government to practice as a guild. We see several guilds throughout the games that we can join, like the Mages Guild and the Fighters Guild, along with other guilds we cannot work as closely with, like the Actors Guild and the Healers Guild being part of this. With the final approval of the establishment of the Mages Guild, it would bring both validity, but also a need for security for the members, as they were not entirely accepted by the common people at this time. Initially, Vanus would hire guards to protect the members. However, as time went on, he would begin to realize that you can't just hire anyone off the street to protect your guild. No, money does not buy loyalty, as there is always someone who can pay more. You need people who believe in your cause and actually benefit from it. This is where the Order of the Lamp come in. This order was a group of knights that specifically protected the mages from their foes, and through dangerous territories, this being in return for various benefits. At this time, the Mages Guild was still only located in Somerset Isle, so they were a rather isolated guild, considering this is a time time where only Ultima people were permitted on the island, but they would still have their interactions with the common people of the island. They would sell magical tools to those who could afford it, even selling what was essentially enchanting kits for those without experience. Now, these were not some Vegas pick-a-card magician gimmicks. These kits actually had serious power. Theoretically, with these tools that the Mages Guild offered, you could even create an enchanted sword so powerful it could cut the world in two, if you had the coin to access it, which did lead to several regular people with heavily enchanted items that was, well, beyond their capability, which would lead to Galarion having to destroy these items. You know what they say, great in theory, terrible in practice. But anyway, moving on. The Mages Guild would eventually make its way to the mainlands of Tamriel after being banned for a rather long time. This, of course, being due to the superstitions of rulers. However, the descendants of these rulers did not share these superstitions, instead seeing the potential benefits having mages guilds in their countries and territories could bring. With it becoming more and more common, the guild would begin to attract different groups, like that of the naturally gifted Bretons. They would begin to have their children tested early and send them for apprenticeships with the Mages Guild, these being funded by the guild or by other sponsorships. We would see many successes of these Breton mages, including that of Gyron Vardengroet, who is especially well known for his alchemy discoveries. He figured out how to become immortal through alchemy. At this time, even though the Mages Guild had expanded past the Somerset Isles, they still had issues on these islands. This in part being due to the islands only allowing Ultima, and also due to the College of Sapiarchs. Now, the College of Sapiarchs viewed the Mages Guild as below them, believing that the Mages Guild had inferior knowledge of magic. They would also hinder the Mages Guild in Landrel. This would be even more evident when Queen Aerin would decide to open the borders to the Somerset Isle to allow others who were not Ultimas in. The Sapiarchs would see the Mages Guild as even more inferior, as they would believe that only Ultima could be true mages. Also, during the Second Era, we would see the Mages Guild have its first real internal struggle, this being with what would become the group known as the Black Casters. Now, the Black Casters were originally a group of mages within the Mages Guild. However, this group being led by Felix Blackcaster Augustus would leave the guild and set out to Greyglawn against orders. The Mages Guild would see this group as a group of hedge mages, for their rebelling against authority, whereas the Blackcasters would claim that they were not renegades, and that the founding of the Blackcasters and what they were doing had nothing to do with any disagreements they may or may not have had with the Mages Guild. Instead, their desires were to go out and start something in the territories that were currently out of reach of the Mages Guild. Interestingly enough, even with the founding of the Blackcasters, Felix Augustus actually remained a member of the Mages Guild, and was still considered in high regard by many of the mages in the guild, even kept in contact with those that were superior to him in this guild. But even with all of this, the majority of the Mages Guild did not view the Blackcasters nicely. With the Mages Guild growing, they were not the only magical group at this time. There was also the Order of the Black Worm, which just so happened to be Vanus Galarion's old friend turned enemy's group. Now in the background, the Order of the Black Worm had been working to normalize necromancy. This is why the spell to trap a soul inside of a soul gem had become common knowledge at this time amongst mages. The Mages Guild was against the use of soul gems on sentient beings, leading to strict rules on soul gem usage. The only reason they were actually permitted was due to their wide availability throughout Tamriel, making them incredibly hard to ban amongst mages. With this came the classification of souls, white souls being the legal souls to capture. These souls were that of smaller beasts and animals, whereas black souls came from sentient mortals, making them illegal to capture. So mages were only taught spells that would capture white souls and regular gems, and regular soul gems could only capture white souls over time. This making the capturing of black souls require something special, which is where we get a very important lecture that Vanus Galarion would attend. This, of course, being given by the Order of the Black Worm. This was presented by Vastari. She used the lecture to demonstrate her sigil geodes that she had invented after retrieving the first black soul gems from Cold Harbor with Manimarco, of course. Cold Harbor being the plane in Oblivion, which is controlled by Molag Bal. Anyway, these sigil geodes allowed for the capturing of a sentient soul, and they also allowed for that soul to be interrogated by the holder of the soul gem for their knowledge, and also easily moved between crystals or even released if it was so desired. Considering that this was against what the Mages Guild stood for, Vanus would become horrified upon learning this and would give an infuriated speech, walking out along with several of his students. Not long after this, Galerian would grow disgusted with his own guild and would leave them. He did still hold the position of Archmagister Emeritus, which, with this, he still held influence over the affairs of the guild, so obviously he didn't hate them that much. He would stay away from the guild for almost a century. This would be until the year 578, still in the Second Era, as he would be called back into action as the Archmagister, this being due to the Soul Burst Crisis. Now, the Soul Burst Crisis occurred due to Manimarco convincing the Emperor of Cyrodiil, Varan Aquilaros, that they could modify the coronation rite to relight the dragonfires and convince Akatosh to gift Varan with the blood of the dragon, as all emperors are supposed to have dragonborn origins. But Varan is not a dragonborn. Akatosh is the dragon of time, one of the divines in the Cyrodiilic pantheon. What Varan did not know is that this coronation was, of course, corrupted. Manimarco had spent weeks weakening the barrier that existed between Neon and Oblivion. With this barrier breaking, it would set the mortal plane into oblivion and potentially become part of Molag Bal's realm as he so desired. When the coronation ritual occurred, due to Manimarco's corruption of it, the divine covenant between Akatosh and Alessia would be broken. Alessia being the founder of the Alessian Empire. This event caused much damage throughout Tamriel, and the Mages Guild would be blamed, even though they had no hand whatsoever in the Soul Burst. This in part being due to the Order of the Black Worm dipping their rotting little toes into politics. They would manage to convert the Empress Regent Clivia Tharn into a worshipper of Molag Bal, controlling her and manipulating her to do what Manimarco wished. This would be to the point where the Mages Guild were expelled from the Imperial City, and of course the Arcane University would no longer be in their hands. Instead, it would be under the control of the Fellowship of the Anchorites, who, if you could guess, was actually just the Order of the Black Worm. So the Order of the Black Worm would essentially take over the Mages Guild's position in the Imperial City, along with having control over the city politically as they had control over the Empress. This made Manimarco the true controller of the Ruby Throne at this time. Now we move on to the year 582 in the Second Era. At this time, the Mages Guild had begun to get established in Skyrim. They, however, were not the only guild of magic users there. No, the other one would be the College of Winterhold. Now at this time, there was an odd disturbance. The founder of the College of Winterhold, Shalador, who had been long dead, had detected a potential threat to his legacy. So he would come down from Aetherius, which is essentially like heaven, to deal with that threat. And what might that threat be, you ask? Would it be a rival college of mages created by the Mages Guild? Surprisingly, no. Instead, it would be the trickster Daedra himself, Sheogorath. Sheogorath had his eyes on the retreat that Shalador had established for mages on the island of Ivea. So Shalador would actually request the help of the Mages Guild to shoo Sheogorath away and save the retreat, which they would manage, and the guild was able to establish a central headquarters on the island. Now, the year 582 was actually a very busy year for the Mages Guild, and there would be several more dangerous events occurring, like with the work of the Order of the Eye, who during this time would protect against extraplanar threats. This through the use of divination or sight magic, along with hunting down Daedric artifacts, scouring ruins, seeking out planar rifts, and investigating visions. This group would deal with various arcane threats, like that of the Great Celestial Obelisk in Craiglorn, which, if not for the work of Sarah Baniel, the explosion of the magic that this obelisk carrying another plane could have caused would have just wiped Craiglorn out of existence. With the rising tensions of the year 582, Vanus Galerion would become increasingly worried about the Order of the Black Worm, this being due to the participation in Molag Bal's plane meld plan. Even with the Mages Guild not being a political society, they would use their influence to argue a ceasefire was needed in the Three Banner War, as every battle was just a distraction from the real problem. What was needed was for everyone to come together and to attack Cold Harbor. Now, the negotiation in the island of Stirk firstly was a difficult one, with Molag Bal's forces attacking in an attempt to prevent them from occurring, along with attempting to convince three warring sides to stop hating each other for 5 minutes to attack a Daedra. But there were some wins to this, albeit not as big as Galerion had hoped for. The plan arising from this meeting would be that the combined mages and fighters guilds Guilds would launch an attack on Cold Harbor, invading this plane in oblivion. Now, this invasion did not start out as planned, with the forces scattered across Cold Harbor, this being due to, of course, Molag Bal's defenses of the realm. Eventually, however, they did regroup and meet in the Hollow City, a sanctuary of a different Daedric prince within Cold Harbor, this Daedric prince being Meridia. Here, they would also manage to rescue the last of the Aelid kings, Lalorian Dainar. He had come to Cold Harbor along with Hollow City and had been kept alive whilst being tortured for centuries. He would participate in the plan to end Plain Meld. Now Galarion, once he teleported into Cold Harbor, he was not actually with his army. Instead, he would be captured by Daedra. These Daedra would not kill him. They would attempt to use his power to accelerate the Plain Meld, which, without his power, it would take months to complete. However, with it could take just hours. So they attempted to use him as a power source for the Great Shackle. However, this would not be successful as Galarion's essence had been fragmented. They instead would use the shards of his essence as a way to power the Dark Anchors. But what they did not consider is what would happen if Galarion was freed, as Galarion would, of course, escape their clutches. He would destroy the Great Shackle as part of his escape. Then he would head to Hollow City and plot a way to end the Plain Meld once and for all. So with the army of Meridia, which was the combined force of the Mages and the Fighters Guilds, they would navigate through Cold Harbor, with the assistance of Meridia, of course, coming up against the vampires in the Orchard and the various minions of Molag Bal throughout. They would manage to get to the planar vortex, which was threatening Nirn. Here, they would use the light of Meridia to destroy the vortex and halt the Plain Meld. So, with the end of the Plain Meld, everyone would return home and it would be happily ever after. No, sometime after Plain Meld, still in the year 582, both the Mages Guild and the Fighters Guild would begin to be targeted by the remnants of the Worm Cult. This being to the point where the leader of the Fighters Guild, Merrick at Aswala, would be killed by a strange device, this device being the Soul Reaper. Now, Vanis Galarion, along with several others, would head to the Worm Cult's hideout to find out what exactly was going on. It was here that they would find out the Worm Cult had plans. Plain Meld was not over in their books. The Worm Cult planned to hide these Soul Reapers throughout the entirety of Tamriel, and were going to use them as a way to siphon souls on a massive scale. This meant the Mages Guild would need to destroy these siphons. Now this would be no easy feat, as Galarion would be kidnapped by who he thought was a friend. Instead, it was a harvester known as Mizama, disguised as Skordo the Knife. Galarion would be taken to Solstice, leaving his all-powerful staff behind, which Gabriel Beniel would take and protect, so both the Fighters and the Mages Guild would be without their leaders. So they would head back to Stirk. Here they would negotiate the Stirk Fellowship, which would be these guilds working together along with who would be sent as ambassadors to the three alliances to gain allies for their fight. Now this is when Galarion's staff would do something interesting. It would begin to project him, and he would use his projection to warn the members about how much of a danger these Soul Reapers truly were. After this, they would decide who would be the leaders of the guilds, these being Prince Azar and Gabriel Beniel. They would then choose their ambassadors for the different alliances. There was no need to really send a request for assistance to the Daggerfall Covenant, as Prince Azar was actually the son of King Thahara Jad. With this, they would also desire to gain more intelligence on what had actually occurred at their destroyed guild halls. So, for this, they would send the leader of the Eyes of the Queen, which is a spy organization, Razam Dar, to investigate their destroyed guild halls, along with captured enemy correspondence. From this, they would learn some rather helpful information. They would learn that the new leader of the Worm Cult would be someone known as Worm Blood, who happened to be close to Manimarco, with some even believing that they were related. He may have been Manimarco's cousin or nephew, depending on the person and what they would believe. With this evidence, the Altmiri Dominion would be convinced to fight the resurgence of the Worm Cult. And along with this evidence, Walks and Ash and Argonian would be sent to convince the parties in the Ebonheart Pack to join the Stirk Fellowship to destroy the Worm Cult. Now we move on to a little while after 582. This is when Manimarco and Vanis Galarion would meet again. This was during a battle between the Necromancers of the Worm Cult and the Mages Guild fighters along with the Lamp Knights. The Necromancers would summon a horde of undead to fight the Mages, and this battle would cause lightning and frost to surround them, with Galarion causing the horde of undead to fall with just a mere touch, and he would cause the very base of the mountain to shake. As the necromancers would scream dying to the battle mages, the king of worms, Manamako, would finally appear, listening to the dying cries and begging of his comrades. But Manamako was not the man that Galarion remembered. In fact, he was no man at all. Instead, he was an undead creature, a lich. Manamako had gained immortality, but had given up his humanity through necromancy and dark magic. During their fight, Manamako opened his mouth, and out came a miasma that spread darkness over the mountains. Everyone felt the touch of death with this dark cloud. As the fight carried on, Galarion and his troops would manage to rip away Manamako's dark artifacts, leading to people believing that he had died in battle as it ended, along with Galarion. The Mages Guild killed and scattered the rest of Manamako's followers, leading to a victory for the guild. Now, moving on to the year 864 with the Tiber War. During this war, there would be the Battle of Hunding Bay, where the Archmage of the Mages Guild in Stros Mkai, Archmage Volwa, would attempt to save the Prince of the Crowns, Prince Ator, from a poisoned arrow directed at him. However, his effort would be fruitless, as everyone on the boat would be burned alive by a dragon named Nafar Little Argus. Considering there would be a vacancy in the Archmage position, they would need to promote someone to that role. This would be Jaganvir. However, this was not a well-liked move. Although Jaganvir had power, he was seen as a poor candidate. Jaganvir would also follow the orders of Amiel Richton, who was the new imperial governor after the Crowns defeated. So Jaganvir was not exactly the most popular during his term, and is a great example of one of the times where they were not exactly apolitical. He was essentially just a pawn in the political game. Now, with the ongoing war with Morrowind during the final years of the Second Era, the Treaty of the Armistice would be signed, bringing an end to the Tiber War. However, this would lead to hostility between the Mages Guild and House Telvanni, which during the Third Era would even be heightened. This being due to, of course, the Archmage at the time, Archmage Trebonius Artorius, in Morrowind, declaring that the two groups could not coexist in a peaceful manner. All of the House Telvanni councillors must be disposed of. This is what he demanded of the Nerevarine. Now we know that his demand was not met, as there is at least one Mage Lord and Councillor of the House Telvanni that survived Trebonius's demands and reign. This being Neloth, who would make his way to Solstheim shortly after the events of the Nerevarine prophecy, and before the eruption of the Red Mountain. Now we move on to the year 431. This is when there would be a new Archmage in charge of the Mages Guild. Now, he was not the most popular, only barely winning the election. This was the Archmage Hannibal Traven. He would set about making many changes to the Mages Guild, including tightening admission policies to the Arcane University and banning necromancy as a practice within the Mages Guild. With all of the changes made, he would cause a major divide in the guild, leading to the resignation of half of the Council of Mages. Now, the banning of necromancy was not actually a new thing, as it was already banned as part of the Mages Guild rules. However, the ban was not really enforced. With this ban, it would lead to the fleeing of one of the mages, this being Orc Willisetta Bra-Cog. This, of course, being due to her use of necromancy. Who could have guessed? She had to flee as they found that she was not only an apologist, but someone who was practicing the forbidden art of necromancy. She narrowly escaped the Order of the Lamp, who attempted to apprehend her, with what happened to her being unknown to this day. Moving into the year 433, this is when a student of the Mages Guild, Martin Septim, who happened to be the illegitimate child of Uriel Septim VII, would leave the guild, unimpressed with the slow rate he was learning, and he would instead turn to the worship and teachings of the Daedric prince, Sanguine. He would learn about the magic of Daedra and eventually briefly had possession of the Daedric artifact known as the Sanguine Rose. However, he would stop worshipping the Daedra when tragedy would occur and several of his friends would die, turning to worship the 9 divines instead. Now, with the alienation caused by the enforcement of the necromancy ban we see a few years prior, in 433 we would see the return of Manamako and his cult of worms. Turns out he did not die in battle between him and Galarion all those years ago, so the alienated mages would join his cult and turn against the Mages Guild. They would attack them, even going as far to burn down the Bruma Guild Hall. Traven knew he could not defeat the Worm Cult and Mannimarco, so he would enlist the help of the Hero of Kvatch. And with this, it would take great sacrifice to protect not only the guild but the entirety of Tamriel. Traven would give his life, and with this, seal his own soul within a black soul gem to protect the hero from Mannimarco's magic. This would allow the Hero of Kvatch to fight the King of Worms. With the defeat of the King of Worms, the hero would be marked as the successor in the Mage's Guild, helping to rebuild the guild after the attacks of the Cult of Worms. Now, we move into the 4th era. This being before the 8th year, as this is when the Mage's Guild dissolved, and other guilds like the Synod and the College of Whispers would take its place as the magical institutions within Tamriel. But why? For that, we should discuss the organization itself. So its structure, rules, and its interactions with outside political groups. So the Mage's Guild's rules and principles are based off the Mage's Guild Charter, with the purpose of this guild being to establish laws surrounding the proper use of magic. Along with this, the rules were also helpful for the preservation, collection, and distribution of magical knowledge through research. With this guild, they do not recruit just anyone, this being part of the rules in their charter, as they only allow those who are intelligent along with demonstrating mastery of the great schools of magic, which are destruction, alteration, illusion, and mysticism. A candidate for this guild must also display knowledge of enchantments and alchemical processes. So with this, the guild is rather selective about who they let into their halls. Along with this, they also have the rules surrounding what other members can and cannot do to one another, as you can be kicked out of the guild if you do several things, including stealing from other members, assaulting, or even murdering other members as well. Anything negative done against other members was considered as something that should be punished harshly in the Mage's Guild Charter. Poor behavior could lead to you actually being permanently banned from the Mage's Guild. But depending on the time and the Archmage, depends on what would be considered really a non-allowable offense, and how many times you could be kicked out before being completely banned. Speaking of Archmages, we should move on to the structure of the guild. Now, the structure of the Mage's Guild is also important when we talk about its downfall. With the head of the organization being called the Archmage, this Archmage would be advised by a council of 6 mages, these being the Archmagister, which actually includes the Archmage as one of these. So these are the head of the Mage's Guild. They primarily make the rules for all of the guild halls, these being rules surrounding the use of various types of magic, the selling of spells to the common people, and acceptance into the Mage's Guild. When it comes to the various guild halls throughout the entirety of Tamriel, they also have their own structure and do have some say on the basic rules in their region. These can vary by region along with the century and era, however the basic structure stays similar. The individual guild halls are led by a guild magister, which may be called a hall magister. Under this, there are 2 groups. The first of these is led by the High Incunabalist or the Master Incunabala, which are essentially the person in charge of the guild hall libraries. They have their own 2 people underneath them, these being the Master of the Tomes and the Master of the Scryer, with the other group being led by the Master at Arms. They had the Master of the Initiates and the Master Palatinus working for them. The Master Palatinus is the head of the Order of the Lamp in the local chapter. Now, with all of this upper hierarchy, it can complicate things at the best of times and make things impossible at the worst. With Vanis Galerian, when he left the Mage's Guild initially, he would describe this hierarchy and what the guild had become. The guild has become nothing more than an intricate morass of political infighting. This was due to the pseudo-bureaucracy making it hard to enact any important changes. The Mage's Guild have a rather political structure for an apolitical group. The Mage's Guild is predominantly an avoider of politics outside of their own, which is why you can see them in most places and see most people present amongst their guild. However, there have been times where they have participated in politics, these often being during times of intense need. We see this with several of their actions during the Second Era, this being with the Mage's Guild being invited to take part in the peace talks for the 3 Banner War, which the Society of the Steadfast had organized on High Isle. Now, the members of the guild did actually play a rather important role when it came to these peace talks, this being the creation of the medallions that would take the members of the peace talks to the secret location of the talks. The need for secrecy being due to several parties like the Ascendant Order wishing to kill members of these peace talks. The Ascendant Order at this time were attempting to steal these medallions. Now, one medallion was successfully stolen, but also recovered. This was that of the Archmagister Delric, Who was the Mages Guild's representative? The medallion would instead be cursed and cause Delric's death. With this, Valesi, who happened to be the guild scholar, helping with the medallions, would remove the spells from all of the medallions and find the supposedly missing medallion of the Fighters Guild representative, which they would find was actually the traitor in their midst. They would then go on to foil the Order's plot and defeat the Ascendant Order. Now with this political intervention, the Mages Guild could be seen as not exactly neutral, as they were actively fighting against the Ascendant Order, who some may view as good, as the Ascendant Order claims they are fighting against tyranny. Along with this, depending on the terms of the peace talks, the Mages Guild could be seen as taking sides. So neutrality is hard to achieve when you are participating in events like these. Now we should move on to discuss the different branches of the Mages Guild. So what exactly does the Mages Guild even offer? The offerings can depend on the guild hall as well as the era, due to the various changes in the rules that are seen in the different times of the Archmages. It can also depend on the membership status of the person seeking the services of the guild. So for those who were not experienced mages and part of the guild already, there were lesser services, as part of the guild charter being that they must offer services to all, even those who were not part of it. With this, they would provide basic spells for those who had no magical knowledge, replacing enchantments on magical items and even teleportation. The specific kind of spells offered by the mages would be based on the specialization of their guild hall. These specializations do eventually change around the Oblivion Crisis. Now, the branches of the guild differ by era, but there are 4 main sub-branches that you can occasionally see. The first being the Order of the Lamp, which are again the knights that protect the Mages Guild. The next being the Order of the Eye. Now, the Order of the Eye have one main purpose, and that is to protect from extraplanar threats. Doing this through the use of various divination and sight magic techniques, like scrying, augury, and gazing mirrors for divination. These being used for the purpose of preventing and stopping world-ending events. This is how they were able to find artifacts associated with the Daedric Prince, Sheogorath, before they would cause too much trouble. Another important branch of the Mages Guild is that of the Travelers League. Now, they are the group that offer the teleportation services throughout Tamriel. Depending on the affiliation, really depends on the kind of services offered by this group. This also depends on the era. So for this, if we look at their purpose in the second era, they do a lot of work when it comes to maintaining a group of portals across Tamriel. Now, this portal network allowed for large groups to travel along with materials. This provided a quick and reliable transport service. With maintaining these portals, the amount of energy and magic required to teleport things would be greatly reduced. Moving on to the third era, this is where we would see the Mages Guild providing instant teleportation for a fee, which provided hall-to-hall travel routes. But this would not be the only thing they would provide. The Travelers League, for those who are high-ranking, would provide teleportation to virtually anywhere in the world. But what happens to be most interesting about the Travelers League is actually their foes. This being the Cabal, which happens to be another branch of the Mages Guild. Now, the Cabal are a rather interesting and secretive group. They are also part of the Mages Guild, of course. Their purpose is summoning Daedra for those who are ranked highly in the Mages Guild, not just anyone. Now, depending on what part of Tamriel you are in, would depend on how legal this practice is. And with the Daedra being seen as not exactly good due to their various interactions with the people of Tamriel, the practice would be somewhat taboo, even in some areas where it was legal. So, if this is what the Mages Guild provide, what exactly is banned by them? Well, simply put, necromancy. Necromancy being the dark arts that is considered to be a form of soul manipulation, using the soul of the deceased to reanimate their own corpses, with those who supported this magic arguing that it was just an expansion upon of the several other forms of magic already approved by the Mages Guild. These being stuff like conjuration, as a guardian ghost can already be summoned without being considered a problem by the guild, as well as the trapping of a soul. This is just considered part of enchantment. However, is it really? Only a few types of souls are considered okay to trap. But anyway, many other members of the guild believe that necromancy was instead its own school of magic, this being death magic. With those who believe this, believe that it could corrupt the person practicing it. Even with the debates, this is why the ban was upheld. There was not enough proven benefit to the use of necromancy for the Mages Guild to integrate it into their practices. So, with the great successes of the Mages Guild, especially with them essentially saving the world along with the help of the various chosen ones, why did they dissolve? Well, this can be for several reasons. Although they were well accepted across Tamriel, we can still see various areas that have suspicions of the group throughout time. We see this with the request during the Three Banners War, The Crowns, who are the remainder of the Yakuda ruling class, would pressure the Red Guardian King to ban the mages from the Red Guardian militaries, which were part of the Daggerfall Covenant. This being due to the generally negative view that was had of the Mages Guild and the mages in general. Red Guardians at this time viewed all mages to be evil individuals who desired to steal souls and tamper with minds, which would not help with their image when it came to the king. Along with this, we would have their political interactions. They may have also damaged their image, with Jaganvir, the Archmage, in the Stros Mkai Mages Guild being perhaps one of the more unpopular Archmages. This being due to him essentially being the pet of the governor. He would police the Mages Guild, preventing them from having any real involvement with the outsiders. This being after an acolyte had attempted to help a Red Guardian leader prepare to face a slowed necromancer. Jaganvir would help in the arrest of that acolyte when the governor came asking questions. Along with Jaganvir later turning a hero by the name of Cyrus into a gremlin when he heard criticism about the Archmage's involvement with the acolyte. With Jaganvir doing whatever the governor requested, he would be doing the opposite of what the Mages Guild stood for, this being not having involvement in politics. So those who were not exactly fond of the governor or of the regime he stood for could gain further distrust of the Mages Guild at this time. This as was seen based on the hatred of Jaganvir, which would also cause the guild itself to be unsettled. Interestingly enough, Jaganvir heavily policing the interactions of the Mages Guild with the outsiders to the point of basically banning these interactions would actually be against the charter of the Mages Guild. So with this, we begin to see cracks forming as their own leader was not even willing to obey the foundational rules of his own guild. This, of course, increasing the mistrust and unsettled feelings among the members in the guild. And we know that this is not the only cause of the guild being unsettled. We also have evidence with the large split seen because of the election of Archmage Traven, causing many to leave the Mages Guild with his enforcement of the ban on necromancy. Now we know that he is not the one who came up with the ban on necromancy. Ban was actually there from the beginning of the guild. However, it was at various times where it was not truly enforced. The use of necromancy was ignored throughout many occasions in the Mages Guild. So when it comes to the necromancy aspect, the guild truly does not have structure. This would further the lack of unity within the guild, especially with the alienated former members of the guild coming to attack the guild after uniting as part of the Worm Cult, including the traitorous members of the council and the guild like Karanya, who is a necromancer in hiding on the council, working for the Worm Cult as well, doing this to undermine the Mages Guild. If we look at two of the groups that emerged after the dissolution, these being the Synod and the College of Whispers, we see a serious division in the desires of the magic using groups, with the Synod desiring to be closed off, also banning the use of necromancy and further limiting the use of conjuration, whereas the College of Whispers would go deeper into exploring necromancy and the use of Daedra summoning magic. This highlights that there was a massive division in magic and magic users that the Mages Guild was unable to solve through their policies. With their attempts to sweep necromancy under the rug and outright ban it after times of turning a blind eye towards the practice, all they would really do is hand over highly skilled mages to their enemy. So with the enforcement of the ban with Traven becoming the Archmage, it is evident that the constant flip-flopping in whether or not the form of magic is actually banned would cause a lot of issues with the guild. Due to the lack of unity throughout the guild and throughout the history of the guild, there would be a lack of stability in the structure of the group. With Vanus Galerion dying, they lost their only strong leader, who at one point even disliked the guild he created to the point of leaving it. So this guild was built on shaky foundations from the beginning, with many going against what the guild actually stood for. Throughout the centuries of the Mages Guild being an institution, although they would have their charter and their rules as a guide for what the guild should be, they failed to live up to this charter and the rules. There was constant changes, there was constantly going against it. We see this with the use of necromancy and the guild almost banning interactions with outsiders during the time of Jaganvir, that the charter was not even followed. It was kind of just a basic guideline that, is used as a coaster for a coffee mug. So the Mages Guild's destruction was the result of their inability to come together on key areas, instead dealing with infighting and heavily disliked leaders. The constant blows to the foundation of the guild with the use of necromancy and being political pawns made the guild into something it was never supposed to be. There was so much infighting even in the more settled times. We see this with the Cabal and the Travelers League hating each other. With the guild being unable to agree on the basics, the constant infighting and going against guild rules would cause a breakdown in what the Mages Guild actually meant. It no longer was a strong institution by the end that was seen as a really positive light in learning and teaching magic, this ultimately leading to the guild dissolving. So let me know in the comments, do you think the Mages Guild should have allowed necromancy, as it was a massive problem? A quick announcement, we have just started a Discord server, so you can check that out through the link in our description. If you enjoyed this video, then you will enjoy this one. It is about Moloch Baal, one of the Daedra that the Mages Guild have fought, and it goes over why anyone may choose to worship him.